Yeah, so tonight we're going to talk about IEPs, and as all of you have a handbook, Parents as Partners in the IEP Process. That is an awesome handbook. We have it available electronically on our website as well. So if you'd like to keep that, you're more than welcome to, and make notes in it. Whatever you need to do to remember what we've talked about and ideas that come to your head as we're talking. But at the Parent Center, we are all the parent consultants are parents of a child with a disability. And so, if you ever need to contact us, know that you're talking with someone that has personal experience as well as working with other families. And we are a nonprofit that's been around since 1984. And like I said, we support families who have children of all ages with all disabilities. So there's no set anything. I will get contacts from families who are looking for support for an adult, and we can help them. So yeah, feel free to share our information with other families. So tonight we're going to talk, this is our basic agenda. So we're going to talk about the special education process, the parent and student's role in the IEP process, and then how to problem solve challenges. The goal that we as parent consultants, and I think as an IEP team, we want to have the whole team work together. Sometimes parents feel like it's them. I don't want to say against the school, but they're on one side and the school is on one side. And the goal is to have everybody work together. Sometimes that takes a little bit of work. Sometimes parents feel a little intimidated when they go to a meeting and sit down and there's all these specialists and teachers on, sitting around, and they feel kind of isolated. But the goal is to get everybody to work together and come up with a plan that's going to be supportive of the student, because really the focus is the student and what their needs are and how can we best meet their needs in the school, so in their educational process. So IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, governs how state and public agencies provide services for students. It starts at early intervention. So children 0 to 3 can, if they qualify, can receive early intervention services through what's called Part C. And then youth, so children from preschool, 3 years old on up, receive services through what's called Part B, but that's through a free and appropriate public education through the school districts. Special education is specially designed instruction. It can happen in the classroom setting. Students that might be medically fragile and can't attend school in person can receive services in the home hospital setting. There's a lot of different ways that a student can receive services. But also instruction in physical education. So a student may not have a learning disability or a cognitive disability, but may need physical education services through the school. And so a student could have an IEP just for that. A student can have an IEP just for speech. So there's, different levels of supports available in the district. And we'll talk about the related services and different supports too. So special education is provided to students and parents at no expense. So it's called a free and appropriate public education. So a school cannot charge a family for any services that the student receives. Charter schools, and it says it here, charter schools are also public schools. So, but they are their own district. So even though there are several charter schools that are within Alpine School District boundaries, they are their own districts. So they don't answer, I guess, to Alpine School District. They have their own board of directors and such, but they are still held to the same rules and regulations as a larger district is. And so if you ever decide to have your child attend a charter school, they should have access to the same services They may not look the same as in a district, but they should, as a charter school cannot say, we don't have an occupational therapist, so we can't provide your student occupational therapy. If the student qualifies on their IEP, the charter needs to provide those services. And then those of you who have sat in IEP meetings, you're often, well, at least annually, you're offered a procedural safeguards, a booklet that talks about parents' rights. And some of those rights are you have access to your students' records at any time. I mean, you need to call ahead and ask because they're kept in a locked cabinet, private from people that don't need to see them. So they are very careful about confidentiality. The school cannot provide any evaluations without your consent. So they can't test a student to see if they qualify for services without you giving them written consent. And we talked about confidentiality. The IEP should not be discussed with anybody that does not have responsibility for that student. A prior written notice. So I talk with parents about this. If you make a formal request to have your student evaluated for special education services, and the school feels they have the data to show that they wouldn't qualify, they need to give you, instead of just saying, no, we're not going to test your child, they need to give you what's called a written prior notice explaining why they're not going to test or evaluate your child. And then disciplinary procedures. A student is disciplined with an IEP, is disciplined similar to their peers, but they can only, I mean, I might be giving you more information than you thought you wanted to know, but they can only be suspended up to 10 days, which sounds like a lot, before the team really needs to take a look and say, are their behaviors related to their disability? And then you would need to hold a meeting with the team, and we'll talk a little bit more about this. I kind of get hung up on some of these slides because I'm like, there's so much information that I can give you right now, but there is more information as we go through the workshop. But in the procedural safeguards, it does talk about the disciplinary process, and then also dispute resolution under special education. So if you don't agree with something that's happening, or the way the school is handling things, we encourage at the Utah Parent Center and even at the Utah State Board of Education, but also at the district level, to try and resolve things at the lowest level possible. So either with your students' teachers, the principal, and then if needed, going to the district. The Utah Parent Center, if it's in there wherever, we can always step in and help support parents and try and help you resolve things again at the lowest level. But don't ever hesitate to ask for your rights and ask for an explanation. At the beginning of the meetings, they'll say, do you want us to go over sometimes they'll say, do you want us to go over procedural safeguards? Other times they will just do it. If they ask, say yes. So even if this is your 5th or 8th IEP meeting, have them explain it, because I think it's good for them to slow down and remember what the parent rights are, as well as you be reminded of what your rights are. So this is a basic special education process, and I'll try not to get hung up on this slide because we've got it explained in the presentation, but start with a referral. So a teacher could approach you as a parent and say, I think your student may need more supports than what I can provide in the general education setting, but they can't refer a student to special education without your permission. You can, on your own, request to have your child evaluated, so you can make a referral to the principal. We'll talk, and like I said, I get hung up on the site, so we'll talk about this in a little more detail in just a second. So, but it starts with a referral process, and then there's an evaluation process that happens. It could be a formal evaluation, it could be a matter of collecting data, and then from that evaluation, You meet as a team, go over that, and determine whether or not the student is eligible. Based on the data and the information they've gathered from the evaluation, is this student eligible for services? Once the student is determined eligible, then you sit down with the IEP team and develop goals based on those discrepancies in the evaluation that they've come up with in the evaluation process. So, if a student qualifies for speech, that will be the only area of where you'll have goals for the student. If the student has a math learning disability and a reading learning disability, then goals will be put together in those areas in their where the deficiencies are. I was in a meeting the other day where the student is a very good reader. The fluency is great, speed is great, but comprehension is super low. So that his goals are for comprehension. So it's very specific to the student's needs. So the IEP goals are developed, and then placement is determined from those goals. So looking at the goals, saying, where is the best place that provides the supports the student needs to achieve their goals? And we'll talk about placement and the different placement options that are available in the district. And then by law, the IEP needs to be reviewed annually. You can request to have an IEP meeting at other times, but it needs to be reviewed at least annually. And it is a law, and teams are found out of compliance if that doesn't happen. And then the process can kind of start over again, and we'll talk about that as we go. Any questions?
Who you request the IEP, you just call this center here?
No. So if your child is under the age of kindergarten age, then yes, you call the Early Childhood Assessment Center that's here at the district office. If they are kindergarten or older, then you reach out to the neighborhood principal. And here, we're going to talk about that right now, initiating the process. So I always encourage parents to make the request in writing. There is a sample letter in the handbook that you could use as a template if you would like, but you want to include your concerns. What you're noticing maybe at home. I keep it fairly brief, but you can also attach any helpful information you might have as far as a diagnosis, struggles that they've had in preschool, or even outside therapy that you're accessing, and maybe a summary of a report from a speech therapist or occupational therapist, even a psychologist or psychiatrist if you've had, again, outside testing done. So make your request in writing, which could also be an email, but I kind of like the paper copy. So you could email it to the principal, but I think I feel like it's beneficial if you take the paper copy and have that face-to-face contact with the principal. In the elementary, okay, so how many of you are parents of elementary age? And then secondary? Okay. So at the elementary level, the principal is the administrator you want to reach out to. Not all schools have a vice or assistant principal. Most do, but not all do. So I would suggest you reach out to the principal. At the secondary level, a lot of schools are divided up by this administrator serves A through last names that start with A through F and then G through whatever. And so you'll want to find out who the administrator is that is over your child and make that request with them. Sometimes parents are working more closely with the school counselors, but school counselors aren't even they're not a member of the IEP team. They can be invited to meetings, and that's, a lot of time your conversation with the school is with the school counselor, but you want to make that initial contact with the principal. And I think we've covered all that's on here. But yeah, share any outside information that you feel will be beneficial for them to know. Okay, so the evaluation process, we talked a little bit about that, and I feel like this slide goes under both referral and evaluation process. The principal can make a decision whether to proceed or not. They may say, and I don't know if you've heard of RTI, response to intervention. Those are interventions that are used the majority in elementary school, but also somewhat in junior high. But response to intervention is a general education intervention that can be implemented in the classroom in hopes to help bridge the gap for students that might be just a little bit behind. And RTI focuses on behavior, on math, and on reading. And so that actually gives the team really good data if they're implementing RTI, because that's going to give the team daily information and how a student is doing on a day-to-day basis, as opposed to a formal evaluation that might be done over 1 or 2 or 3 sessions. And so that actually is a requirement, RTI, for specific learning disabilities. So they can't do just a formal evaluation to determine if a student has a specific learning disability. They also have to have the RTI to go along with it. And I am jumping ahead. I'm really good at doing that. But one way or another, they need to give you a prior written notice saying, yes, we'll move forward with the evaluation process, or no, because of the data, we feel like the student does not require or will qualify for special education services, so therefore we're not going to do the evaluation process. But they've got to have that hard, fast data, just like they would to qualify a student. So it can't just be a off the cuff decision by the administrator. Okay, and then the evaluation process. Okay, so the evaluation process determines if a student has a disability. And there are 13 classifications, and we'll go over those in just a minute, that fall under IDEA. It also determines the educational needs of the child. You know, what areas do they need support in? And I knew this was on here. They also, all this data can be collected through RTI. Once you sign a consent to evaluate, the school has 45 school days to complete that data collection and evaluation process. The district does encourage them to get it done as quickly as possible, but the beginning of the school year and at the end of the school year are extremely busy times for the school psychologists, the resource teachers, and other providers that would provide services under an IEP. And so they do have that window under the IDEA rules that they do have 45 school days to complete the evaluation process. Yes.
So like if you sent them a report from an outside person and you emailed them and you contacted them, say, hey, here's the report that you asked me for, they have 45 days. Like, don't bother them.
So that can help speed the process along if it's the same or similar to the testing that the school would do. Yeah, so a lot of times, so when you bring outside information to the table, the teams are advised to consider it. I have been in meetings where they're like, yes, this is very similar to what we do and it's current enough. So it's got to be fairly current, that we can use this instead of putting your child through more evaluations. Yes, so RTI, response to intervention, there's 3 tiers. So tier 1 would be more of a classroom-wide intervention. Kind of like hands to yourself and feet on the floor. What
area, identify research-based strategies for that, and so then we provide intervention for that area of weakness. And we track it, and it depends on what the intervention says, right? Should see progress within 4 weeks or within 6 weeks. And then look at that, is that progress flat? Or are we seeing the progress? And then that might be, we just need to give the student a little bit additional support, right? But if we're seeing that it's flat and we're not seeing a response to that intervention, then it might mean that there is a learning disability. So it is something that's done at different schools do it in different ways, but what she's talking about is tier 1 and tier 2. Tier 1, everybody gets. Tier 2 is more targeted to smaller groups. And tier 3 interventions are more something that would be targeted on an individual basis. So again, let's say you're looking at reading, and maybe there's multiple components of reading, right? So it might be, I think that they're having a hard time with their phonological awareness. So then we would do interventions targeted to increasing their phonological awareness, and we track how do they respond to that. That is part of the evaluation process with the specific points.
So it can be a 5.2 process within the 45 days, but like something that might be ongoing.
It could be ongoing, but if you make a formal request, it should actually become part of that 45 school days. So a school shouldn't say that we need to do RTI for 6 weeks before we start the 45 school day evaluation. And if you get that kickback from the school, then don't hesitate to reach out to the special education office, the district office, because they can help clarify that with the principals on, no, this really can be part of the process, the formal evaluation process. Yeah. Any other question? And I'm walking closer because so then I can pick you up with the.
Well, schools response to intervention is not a special ed program.
Right.
It's an instructional method, right, of identifying weaknesses and strengthening those. And so in an ideal world, the school would be coming to you and saying, we're working with your student and seeing some areas, right, that maybe we would like to do some intervention with.
Right.
Then you're a part of that process.
Yeah.
But we know that sometimes they don't know, so you're bringing that to them. But they should already be able to say they're already getting. Here's the tier 1, 2, and tier 3 interventions. Maybe we need to move your student into the tier 3.
Yeah, no, I like that. I know some schools have a reading program called 95%, and that is an intervention. So some schools just have them built into their programs right now. Any other questions about the evaluation?
So I just add, so she talked about the kind of when you sign the document called permission to test, but you evaluate. That's when the 45 days period.
Right. Yeah, thanks. Okay. So you go through the evaluation process, you meet as a team to go over it, and for some reason something's just not clicking with you as far as you feel like they didn't see the picture that you see, and you may not agree with part of the evaluation that they did. You can request through this district to get an independent education evaluation. So have someone else evaluate that child and have them test in the area of your concern to see if that shows anything different as compared to what the school's evaluation showed. So if you make that request through the district, then the district will pay for it. If you go out and get your own private evaluation, then you will have to pay for it. There aren't hundreds of evaluators, and so oftentimes they may be very similar to who you would use, or they may reach out to another district or someone else in the district, but someone that may not be working directly with your child, and to provide that evaluation. So you do have that right to request that if you don't agree. All right. And then once a student qualifies for an IEP and they're receiving services, they the school is required to reevaluate every 3 years to determine if the student still is eligible for services and if their eligibility has changed as far as, what areas of concern. A student cannot be removed from an IEP unless they've gone through the evaluation process and and it shows that they no longer qualify. So a teacher can't just say, I don't think they qualify anymore, we need to remove them. They really need to have that data. Again, data always drives it as far as whether they're eligible, whether they're not eligible. Or, if you're seeing some big changes in your child one way or another, you can also make the request to have them reevaluated. Okay, so classifications, eligibility, there's 13 classifications that a student can qualify under for special education services. And so you can see them listed there. A student with ADHD, maybe anxiety, depression, that need the level of specialized instruction may qualify under other health impairment, but I think most of them are pretty self-explanatory. A student may only need supports for behavior to the point where they need specialized instruction, and that would be the qualifier under emotional behavioral disability. But those are classifications that have come down from IDEA. And then we talk about the 3 prongs to special education services. So 3 prongs for a student to qualify for special education. Does a student have an IDEA disability? So under one of those 13 classifications. Does a student need an actual diagnosis? No. So a team can't say, you need to go get an official diagnosis before we can determine if they qualify for services. That's against the law. A diagnosis is not required. But also on the flip side, a diagnosis doesn't automatically qualify a student for special education services. So we'll go back to ADHD. A student with severe ADHD may need specialized instruction, which is the 3rd prong of eligibility. But a student with mild ADHD may just need a few accommodations to help them access their curriculum, but not need specialized instruction. So the goal is to keep the student in the least restrictive environment. We'll talk about that in just a minute. But it's against the law to put a student that doesn't qualify for special education services into special education. And again, we'll talk about that in just a minute. So the 2nd prong, does it adversely affect educational performance? And I like to look at this one along the same lines as, does it limit their access to education? And when we talk about access to education, we're then looking more at accommodations on what they need to support them in the classroom. Not the specialized instruction piece, but the actual accommodations like preferential seating, directions reread, taking tests in an alternate location because they might have some test anxiety, maybe even having a note taker or getting a copy of the teacher's notes, especially in secondary schools, so that they can follow along. So some students might jot something down in their notes, but then miss the next 5 minutes of instruction. And so there are a lot of different accommodations, a wiggle chair, fidgets, sensory or movement breaks. So accommodations can look like a lot of things, but it's all about helping them access their education. And then again, the 3rd would be the main qualifier would be, because of their disabilities, does the student require specialized instruction? And that's when you modify the work. So it's not the same as their peers. Okay, developing the plan. Okay, what is an IEP? It's the Children's Written Individualized Education Program. A lot of us call it the Individualized Education Plan, IEP. So it's developed, reviewed, and revised in a team meeting. So let's talk about the team members. So there are 4 main members of an IEP team. And if one of those members are missing from the IEP meeting, the annual IEP meeting, or any other formal IEP meeting, then it's not an IEP meeting. It becomes a meeting, a school meeting, because these four players need to be there. The LEA, which is the local education agent, which, like I said, is typically the principal in elementary or a vice principal at the secondary level. It can also be someone that the principal appoints to be the LEA, but they've got to be knowledgeable about the student. Typically, it's someone that has their master's and have that knowledge of being able to be the LEA. So the LEA parents, the general education teacher, and the special education teacher. So a student that just receives speech, it would be the speech therapist, but still the general education teacher. That would probably be the only time when it's not a special education teacher in there. I can't think of another time that it wouldn't be the special. Might be the only provider, the vision specialist or the deaf and hard of hearing specialist. Yeah. Well, yes. So they're not required. They could be excused, but participate in another way. So yeah. So if your student is receiving related services like occupational therapy, so if they have a special education team and are receiving services under the umbrella of course or a special class, and we'll talk about those in a minute. They need to be there, and then they may be receiving related services under speech, occupational therapy, adaptive PE, and then maybe vision, hearing specialists, things like that. They should be there. If they're not, then you need to sign a permission slip to have them excused. But typically, if it's the annual review, then that's related service provider should be conversing with you prior to the meeting, letting you know that they're not going to be able to attend, and then go over the goals with you before the meeting so that you're aware of it. But the team cannot put together occupational therapy goals without the occupational therapist there. So the OT should be leading those. I actually encourage parents to involve their student as young as possible, and is appropriate. So I've been in a meeting where a fifth grader came to the very beginning of the meeting, and she shared with the team, just took like 5 minutes and shared with them what she likes to do, what she feels like she's good at, what she feels like she struggles with, and then also shared ideas of what she feels like would help. And I thought that was super powerful because it helped the team focus on her for a minute. She was super nervous and was super ready to leave and go back to class after that. But that was awesome. When the students reach transition age, which we'll talk about in just a minute, so like 14, they need to be involved in their IEP. But again, as to the point of whatever is appropriate for them and they are comfortable. So it could be just a matter of you working with them prior to the meeting, talking about goals and accommodations, or it could be where they're there, they run the meeting. We did a workshop on student-led IEPs that we've got on our YouTube channel that is super awesome. And so that's something to consider as well, is having your students involved. I just like the thought of, if a student is struggling with accommodations and they know that you've helped put them together, but they don't know why they have them, they don't understand even how to implement them or whatever, the more involvement you get from them, the more buy-in. And so I think, as youth, what teenager likes their parents and other adults making decisions for them? None of mine did. I don't know, maybe you have someone that just is super compliant. I don't know. But you know, the more that you can get them involved, I think the more buy-in they have, and it helps them learn how to self-advocate. So advocate for themselves, learn, you know, I do have a disability, that's okay. I learn in a different way. And these accommodations are what helps me stay up with what I need to be doing. Okay, so again, we talked about you need to have at least one annual IEP meeting. You have the right to request a meeting at any point. We just encourage parents to don't overkill, because, you know, we need to be then respectful of the teacher's time and the fact that they're a teacher first. And so, you know, but there are times when you do need to have an extra IEP meeting. And so don't hesitate to ask for that meeting. Components of the IEP. So again, in special education, there are a lot of acronyms. I've heard this: present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. That acronym pronounced a wide variety of ways. It doesn't really make sense, but we'll break these down and discuss each of these on another slide, on their own slides. But there's the present levels, and then we talk, so that's the first component of the actual IEP, and then you talk about goals, then you talk about services, and then supports of how we're going to support the student. So basically like accommodations in supporting the student. So present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. Focus on the strengths, your concerns, bring in the evaluation information, and then basically talks about the academic needs, functional performance needs of the student and where they're at compared to their typical peers. Sometimes these can be a downer because it brings reality to the forefront, you know, as far as where they're at compared to their peers. That's kind of why I like the idea of having a student, or even if the student isn't comfortable coming, you starting the meeting off with, let me share with you some of the things that my child really enjoys doing, you know, and remind them that they are a child. They're not their disability. Their disability affects their access to their education, but they are a child. And they like to run, they like to play, they like to do a lot of the things that all the other kids like to do. But, you know, talk about their strengths and, you know, how they are an important part of your family, different things like that. Because in harsh reality, an IEP is developed to support the areas that they struggle with. And so, you know, we might get a little bit discouraged if we're not talking also about the things that they're really good at. So that's the first component of the IEP, and a present level is written for every area that they receive support in. So it could be for reading, for writing, for math, for social skills, even adaptive skills, life skills. Mm-hmm.
It's a paper.
Oh.
It was lightened our IEP meetings, and it talks about like what helps him, and it can bog you down a lot in these meetings, but like to turn it and say like he's motivated by high fives and different things. It has lightened our meetings so much, and without a lot of information, there's more people than there are at two tables. You know, like,
right.
it really helps to do that.
Well, and one thing that we share with families a lot is a template similar for what's called a student snapshot that goes over the same similar, you know, very similar things, talking about their strengths and stuff. And again, reminding teams about what our children like to do and focusing on their strengths. I love that. Thanks for sharing. I think like at the secondary level, in fact, I share the student snapshot a lot with parents who have students in junior high and high school, or teachers. So in the secondary level, their IEP is for specific things, but their accommodations may be implemented in every class. but their IEP services may only be provided in math or their language arts. But, you know, preferential seating or extended time on tests or different things like that should be implemented in every class that's appropriate. And so I encourage parents to do a student snapshot and put those accommodations in there as well to share with teachers so that they can be familiar with the students. So needs determine IEP goals. So if there's this, if a student qualifies for reading but not math, then they can't put math goals into an IEP. If a student qualifies for comprehension, but their fluency is really good, then they're not going to have a fluency goal. They're going to base the goals on comprehension. If, you know, so I think that makes sense. So they just can't just throw goals in there because they really need to be based on their needs and the needs that they qualify for. And we're talking goals. So we're not talking accommodations here, we're talking goals. So once your student is their needs are identified, the IEP team works together, which includes you. You can bring ideas to the table. An initial IEP can be a little different. Well, especially if you're starting at preschool. But if you're going into in 3rd grade or 5th grade or 7th grade and say, hey, we've missed some signs and we need to have our student evaluated. The conversation can happen with the team once he's determined eligible to talk about goals and you can bring your concerns to the table. What information, what goals you feel like would be important for him or her to work on, and have that discussion with the teacher or the related service providers. That really, in the ideal world, should be what's happening, is that discussion should be going both directions and working together. A lot of collaboration, back to that team and partners slide that has the circle. That's, in the ideal world, that's really what should be happening. I sit in a lot of meetings where it's awesome, where the team is working so well together, and you know, the speech therapist says something about, you know, we're going to work on turn taking and conversations, and then the OT says, well, I can see how I can implement this when I'm working on this, and the teacher says, yeah, we will, you know, work on turn taking when we're choosing an activity or inviting another student to participate. And so it's lovely when that comes together. It doesn't always come together, but I mean, that's the goal, and bringing the focus back to the student, their needs, and how can we help them be most successful. And then, yes, there always should be monitoring the progress of the goals. In the IEP, you list the goals, and under the goal, it says how will progress be monitored. And sometimes it will be data, sometimes it will be grades, depending on the level of the student and the support they need. And then it should also talk about how often you receive progress reports on the goals that are in the IEP. And most of the time, those progress reports should be coming out as often as report cards. And I think most elementaries are now on a quarter system. I think some might still be on a trimester. If that's what your school does and a trimester isn't often enough, I actually was in a meeting the other day that they were still in trimesters, but the team just agreed to have reports come out quarterly. And so if you feel like, you know, we need to be respectful of their time, you know, weekly progress, is that going to give you adequate is that going to give the student enough time to make progress and for the team to see adequate progress? Maybe not so much, but quarterly is definitely going to help you know what kind of progress. And then with those progress reports, you can take a look at it and go, okay, he's making progress, so that's good. Let's keep on this goal. Or he's not making any progress. Maybe we need to relook at that goal and break it down a little bit and break it down in steps so that they can make progress towards that goal. So that's really good information for you as a parent to kind of know where they're at and maybe see if you need to review the goals with the teacher. Parent-teacher night is parent-teacher night. It's not a mini IEP. So that kind of sometimes is hard because you want to go over the progress and go a little deeper. But if you need more time than the 10 minutes that's at parent-teacher, then schedule a meeting. You totally have the right to do that. We also want to encourage parents to have, and teachers to have high expectations of the students. High expectations, realistic expectations. There was a new law that came out that used the term appropriately ambitious goals. So what's appropriately ambitious for my daughter might not be ambitious enough for your student, and vice versa. So, comparing student to student may not be the right thing to do, but really looking at what is appropriately ambitious. Let's have high expectations. We might need to step back a little bit, once we've given it a good try, but let's have high expectations for our kids. This just talks about how the specialized instruction is geared towards meeting the needs, the individual needs of our students, and how the services aren't considered a place. So we were talking about team members and the related services. So here's a list of some of the related services. A student that might have a physical disability may qualify for transportation as an accommodation. A student that's in a small group special class will most likely qualify for transportation because they may be bused to their neighborhood school might have a special class in it, or their neighborhood school might not. And so the student might need transportation to access the special class that's provided at a neighboring neighbor school, neighboring neighborhood school. Anyway, so we've talked about a lot of these. Nursing services is a related service. Social work, a lot of social workers may do social skills class or work on self-regulation, emotional regulation, things like that. So those can be related services as well. And then, so you go envisioning, if you haven't done an IEP yet, you go through present levels, you do goals in the different areas that they qualify for. And then we talked about the progress reports, progress monitoring, progress reports. And then you talk about the date the services are going to start, which typically are the next day. They can be as soon as the next day. And then how often, where they're located, and duration. That one always throws me off because the duration is until they don't qualify anymore. That's how I understand duration. But the frequency could be, so say your student qualifies for 60 minutes of speech a month. And you might think, well, that's not very much, but they may do 20 minutes a week. With my daughter, 20 minutes a week is great because they would break it up into 10-minute sessions. So she'd get 2 10-minute sessions a week. 10 minutes was long enough, attention span. Any more than that, they would lose her. So, they take a lot of things into consideration too when they're looking at length of time. If your student qualifies for math and they need that help in resource, the idea is to not pull them out of their general education setting as much as possible. So leave them in general education as much as possible, remove them as little as possible, but enough to meet their needs. So they still need to meet their needs. And so if a student qualifies for 20 minutes of math services a day in resource, then that's removing them as little as they can, still support their goals, but then letting them access the rest of their classroom time in the general education setting, even being exposed to the math that's being taught in general education. And the location would be where they receiving the services. So in resource, adaptive PE might just be, in another classroom or in the gym. Speech therapy might be in the SLP's office in the library or wherever the office might be. So that That would be the location of where they receive services. Okay, so duration, I'm looking at this now as far as how many minutes. The frequency would be 2 times a week, once a week. Okay, supports. Supports are looked at as accommodations. So what does a student need to help them access the curriculum? One parent, sometimes parents want a one-on-one aid for their student and they're like, look, see, it says supplementary aids. And I'm like, well, that's without an E. Because an aid with an E would be a person. An aid without an E would be an accommodation. It can look like accommodations in the classroom, accommodations for assessments. A lot of times, as you're going through the IEP, you talk about accommodations, and we'll talk a little more about some other accommodations. But towards the end of the IEP, it talks about assessments. So year-end testing, basically, state testing, and what accommodations from their IEP can be used on those tests. And a lot of them do cross over. The year-end testing, and they always change the name. Is it RISE right now or Acadia? I don't even know what it is. RISE. A lot of accommodations are built into it. So there's a lot, I think, that is read to the students. So that would be an accommodation automatically provided. For students that are in junior high and high school, getting the right accommodations in place are so important because they can be used, the ones that are appropriate can be used towards on the ACT. But they need to be, the student needs to have been using them over a couple of years. So a decision can't be made right before the ACT that the student needs accommodations. And so we're going to implement them, get them on a plan, and then have ACT approve them. They need to have already been using them and proven that they need them. If behavior is a problem, student, whether they have an IEP or not an IEP, can have a behavior intervention plan if behavior is significantly impacting their access to education. So again, there's data, of course, that's involved, but the school psychologist typically will be the one to conduct a functional behavior assessment. That looks at the behavior and if there's an antecedent, a trigger that is setting off the behavior in the student, and then looking at working with the team on a plan to come up with how can we support the student to hopefully lessen the trigger, lessen the antecedent. You know, so a student that might have too many transitions built into their day, the transitions might set them off in one way or another, where they run, where they might be aggressive, whatever. And then the team comes together to put together a behavior intervention plan to support that student. And that behavior intervention plan is adult supports. So it's scaffolding from the adults to help support that student. And then oftentimes the student will then have some behavior goals in his IEP to help support their learning process too. You know, whether it might be goals on working on self-regulation. That's just the top one that's coming to my mind. But taking turns, different things like that. But again, the behavior intervention plan is adult supports. And typically if a student has a behavior intervention plan, you meet as a team, and it's pretty much the IEP team. It might not be like all the related service providers, but they will discuss, you know, interventions, including the parents, what works. Like if you've tried things at home that work, sharing those with the team is super awesome. Things that haven't worked, I know that things that work for us at home don't necessarily transfer over into school, and vice versa. What works at school doesn't necessarily transfer into home. And so sometimes the ideas that I might bring to the table may not be as applicable at school. But you know, if you've had tried and true, or if you're working with an outside therapist, an ABA therapist, or another therapist, and working on behavior goals, that information is great to bring to the table as well. So any information that you have that you can share with the team is always beneficial. Assistive technology. So in talking about accommodations, assistive technology can be part of that accommodation list. It can be high tech, it can be low tech. So it can be something as simple as a pencil grip, can be assistive technology. You know, a student that has a hard time with writing and can write with a chunky crayon might need a pencil grip in order to write with a pencil. But it might be as even a student that just can't get handwriting down, but can do keyboarding. That's an accommodation. Voice to text is an accommodation. They have fancy pens where it can record the lecture. That's not so much in, they're not called lectures in elementary school. The instruction discussion, and the student can be writing on, I mean, it has to be the certain paper with a certain pen, but they can be writing on the paper, and then when they go back to their notes, they can turn on the, point it to the place on the paper and listen to the part of the discussion that was being given at the time. So, you know, in upper grades, they might be able to write words. So say you're talking about, I'm not even going to be able to say a book. And so, you know, they might be talking about different characters in the book. And so they might write the character's name, but not any more notes than that, but they're recording it at the same time. So then they can go back to the character's name, touch it and listen. So, I mean, there's so much out there that can be accessed. The district has a assistive technology team. So if you feel like your student needs access to assistive technology, you can make that request through your IEP team to have the district assistive technology team come and do an observation and make recommendations. So that is, I don't want to say it's a hidden gem, but that's an awesome resource that we have available to us in the district. All right, transition IEPs start at the age of 14. And we start to look at transitioning into adulthood and what does it look like to prepare for that. And so a lot of the goals can be related to employment, post-secondary education, and life skills such as independent living skills. In high school, you know, all our kids, I remember wanting to take classes that were geared towards what I thought I wanted to do after high school. Did I end up doing it? Not necessarily. Did any of us do what we thought we were going to do when we graduated? Maybe not so much, maybe so. But I mean, just making sure that there are goals that are geared towards their transitioning to adult life. And this is an overview of a lot of glimpses into the IEP process. So feel free to hang out afterwards and we can answer some specific questions too. So we've already talked about student participation, and these are some ideas of what you can talk with your student about in participating in their IEP meetings. And again, we've got that student-led IEP workshop on our YouTube channel with the Parent Center. That's super awesome, and walking you through that whole process. But it just teaches the students really good skills and helps them understand their role in their whole educational journey. So placement, least restrictive environment. You've probably heard this term, LRE, least restrictive environment, where the students with a disability participate with their other peers without disabilities to the extent possible. We're going to advance and then we'll kind of talk about this a little more. So the least restrictive environment is the regular classroom. And then there can be the regular classroom with resource support. So that's another placement. Resource is a different placement than general education. Then there can be a level of support, which is called a special class. In the district, they have 3 different focuses under special class. There's special class life skills, special class autism, and special class emotional behavior. So depending on the needs of the student, if they need more support than what's being provided in the regular education setting with resource support, and they need more than that, then you can take a look at special class and do they need that level of support. My daughter, in order for her to participate in a regular education class, would actually be a very restrictive setting for her because she needs a lot of support. And so she would not really gain any educational benefit from being in a regular education class. So her appropriate placement is special class and even special school. So in the district, we have 2 special schools. We have Dan Peterson on the east side of the district and Horizon School, which is out in Saratoga Springs. So they do the same thing just so that students don't have to be transported since our district's so huge. So they don't have to be transported as far, but in a special school, all the students have IEPs and need a higher level of support. And there are full-time school nurses that support a lot of our students that have high medical needs. But just because the student has a high medical need does not mean a special school is their appropriate placement, because cognitively, they may not need that level of support. So gen ed setting with resource might be their most appropriate placement, and then receive medical support at their neighborhood school. So if something doesn't automatically qualify, there's got to be, it's the whole student taken into consideration. So special school and then home instruction. So some students that might be very medically fragile and just can't come to school may receive home instruction. Some students, I've been in meetings where students have significant behaviors where they might be placed on home instruction for a short period of time until the school can put together a plan to provide the support the student needs as they come back to school. So that kind of gives you an idea of home instruction. But yeah, that's kind of the placement continuum for our district. Every junior high and high school has a special class life skills. They're beyond elementary, there's not special class autism. There are special class emotional behavior supports at the secondary level. Oh, thank you. It's supported by the school. So it's not a high level of instruction I shouldn't say that. It's not a high amount as far as hours go. It's typically a couple of hours a week. So I've been in a lot of IEP meetings, or a handful, students that have really tough behavior, and they may put them on a shortened day, a modified schedule, with the goal of building up as the student can handle it, and as the supports are being provided at the school level. So placement is based on IEP goals, provided as close to the home or neighborhood school as possible, and then consider harmful effects. And as far as, like with my daughter, she was at our neighborhood school for junior high, and she loved being with her peer tutors, but she needed a little more support than that, and so I kind of had to weigh out, is it worth pulling her away from her peer tutors to be in the special school to receive the high level of support she needed, or was it more beneficial to have her not receive that level of supports but be around her peer tutors? And so sometimes there's a little balancing act, but all those are taken into consideration as far as placement decisions go. It's just not based on the IEP goals, or we can't handle this student anymore, we need to move them to a different placement. There's a certain protocol that the district requires, and teams can't just jump to a decision. There's got to be the data, they've got to already having access to resources in the district to see how they can support the student at their current placement before they look at a change of placement. Thank you. No, you're good.
Do the
special classes, like at the elementary school level,
Mhm.
they stay at the same school? Or how does that work?
For the most part. So preschool kind of moves around a little bit and kindergarten. But once they're in first grade, typically there's a first through third grade class and then a fourth through sixth grade class. But the majority of the special classes, first through sixth grade, stay put. So they're at that school. I mean, yeah, sometimes, I mean, demographics change. So our district is growing crazy. And Orem used to be the high growth and now it's Eagle Mountain and Lehigh, you know, and so demographics might change, which means that, you know, the number of students that need support in this area are fewer, thank you, and so they might need to shift classes to different buildings to keep them closer to their neighborhood schools. So, and Peter.
Love to have special classes at the elementary school. Right, some have two special classes, and as the sizes of the classes have grown, we've tried to, in some cases, we've tried to split and have classes closer to where the students live. But once a special class, like 1 through 6, is in a school, it's there. It's there. Okay.
Right, yeah, and that is kind of hard with preschool and kindergarten because every school can't house all of those grades and classes, and there are a lot of preschool classes.
And sometimes what Hillary may be speaking about too, is the class stays there, but the boundary.
Oh, yeah.
The number of students in the class. They try to balance a lot of different
Yeah.
class sizes. Levels for students. And so sometimes the bus boundary changes. The class may still be there, but now you're in a boundary. But we're trying to keep consistency where if this is the school you were at, we try to allow them to be able to continue there if they'd like to. Okay. But we have had times where, I'll give an example out west, where we have an autism class with 19 kids in it. And so even though you haven't moved, we added a class to Silver Springs Elementary. And so now you might be in that boundary. Okay. So that's some of the things that we do.
No, awesome. Thanks for that explanation.
Does the teacher get the training to evaluate kids, like special needs kids?
Does every teacher get the trainings for how to support a student with special needs?
Yeah.
No, not necessarily. I'll let Peter answer that because that's.
Well, begin every semester, the case manager, you make sure that every teacher that has them has a snapshot of the IEP. So they're aware of the goals, they're aware of the accommodations and supports that student needs. So who evaluates the kids?
Who does the initial evaluations and stuff? So the school psychologist, there's the school psychologist assigned to every school. They're very involved with it. And then typically like the resource teacher at the school. Yeah, so like the science teacher, history teacher, no. But the resource teacher that may be working with math, reading. Yeah, no, good question. They need to be familiar with the student. And so sometimes that's why it takes 45 school days, because if they're not, they want to come in and observe the student in different settings to be able to collect data and make sure that they have a really good snapshot of the student. So good question. And I didn't introduce Peter. This is Peter Clark. He's the special education director over secondary schools in Pine. So, what your signature means. So at the end of the meeting, they have everybody sign the IEP. If you read above the signature line, this asks a signature for those who have participated in the IEP meeting. And so you want to sign it because you want to show that you're there. If there's something that you don't agree with, in the IEP, you can say, would you please put this in the notes that I don't agree with this portion? But also, because I don't agree, can we schedule a time to meet again to go over this so I feel better about it? Or so that I understand, or, we come to agreement of the goal or the services or whatever. I do hear a lot from parents that I didn't sign it because I didn't agree with it. And I mean, that's totally understandable, but the team should be explaining to you that the signature means that you were there and that you participated. And so again, if you don't agree, have them put that in the notes. You can circle the section and initial it. And then say, yes, can we schedule a time to come back and meet? And that's the best time to schedule a meeting, is when you're at the meeting and everybody's there. Because then everybody can pull out their calendars and take a look and get a date on the calendar to when you can meet again. And then you should always receive a copy of the IEP. You can receive a hard copy, you can have them email it to you, but you should always have a copy of the current IEP. Always, always. And if you lose it, again, procedural safeguards, you have the right to access their file. And so you can call the teacher and say, I'd like to come in and make a copy, or could you please make another copy? I've misplaced mine, and send it. Either email it, send it home with my student. Sometimes that's not the best way because you might not get it if you have it sent home, but yeah. And then we've talked a little bit about problem solving. At the Utah Parent Center, again, we are all parents of a child with a variety of disabilities. And so it's nice to be able to offer that parent-to-parent support, because we get it, to a certain level. Everybody deals with different things. But I think knowing that you're talking to another parent that has been through the process is hopefully helpful for you to feel a little more comfortable, and like you're talking with someone that understands to some point what you are going through as well. We do a lot of trainings, workshops, and the majority of my time is spent talking to parents by phone and help answering questions, guiding them to the right resources, or connecting them with the right people at the school, and supporting parents. I do attend, you've heard from me tonight, I attend a lot of IEP meetings with parents too. So we're here to support parents. Oh, and we're here to help, like that slide says. In the procedural safeguards, it talks about dispute resolution, and our goal at the Parent Center is to support parents through the process. So if a formal dispute is what is necessary, we can give you that information. We are not case managers. We don't fill out forms. We don't fill out complaints. We don't do any of that for you, but we can give you the information you need to access what you feel like you need. But we want to help you hopefully be able to resolve the situations at the lowest level possible. So again, talking about working with the teacher at the school, the special education teacher, or even the general education teacher. If you feel like your student has accommodations and there's a teacher at the junior high or high school that just flat out won't provide them, then you go to the administrator there at the school, and it's their responsibility to provide that training to the teacher. And if that principal's like, I can't do much about it, then you go to the special education director at the district office and talk with them, and they can help provide that training for the team. A student that qualifies for an IEP is entitled to their IEP services and is also entitled to their accommodations that are in their IEP. It's not a teacher decision on whether or not they're going to implement them and provide them. They are entitled to them. It's a legal document. And then there's a level of process of for dispute resolution. There's mediation. I've been in a mediation meeting where the state hires a mediator that sits in on IEP meetings and kind of helps navigate it, asks appropriate questions, and tries to steer the team to work together to resolve issues. And one of the ones I was sitting in on, it was pretty amazing because there was so much conflict between the parent and the principal. There just was. And there was no bending on the principal side, which was super sad. But and right before, I think we had 1 or 2 mediated IEP meetings. And then right before the third one, the principal went to the parent's house and apologized. And then things just went so much more smoothly. And it was super awesome to see, and just the feeling of everything at that last meeting was just so much better because the parent felt heard. And then the principal was on board. The principal didn't need the law was being followed, and there were just some personal things that the principal needed to set aside to be able to focus on the student, and it was super awesome. So, sometimes that parent needed to go to mediation to get this result because it was not happening at the school level, and the district couldn't get it to budge either. So sometimes it needs to be taken a little further. A state complaint can be filed as well. Due process is more of a lawsuit. So due process goes before a judge. And so if you want to file a due process, be prepared to know that might want to have an attorney, might not, but you'll be held accountable for the legal fees that go along with it. And then civil action, of course, is a lawsuit as well. So there are different ways that that situations can be handled. Hopefully, as you reach out, if you need to reach out to the district level, you can get the support that you need there so that it doesn't need to go further than that. In some cases, hopefully not in our district, although I know there have been due process and state complaints filed against the district. Hopefully things can be resolved much sooner than that. But that is a safety net for parents under procedural safeguards. And there's a lot of information in there about formal and informal dispute resolutions. Know that once the IEP is written, it's not set in stone. So even though by law, we need to have an annual IEP meeting, that doesn't mean the IEP that's it for a year. You can, again, request a meeting to make any changes that you feel like are necessary. And the teacher can reach out to you, or the related service providers can reach out to you and say, hey, we feel like, we need to make some changes. The student's making great progress, or we feel like the student's really struggling with this goal. Let's meet and readjust this goal to where it's more appropriate. So nothing is ever set in stone. So say your child's IEP is due in November. That IEP is written for goals till the next November. So if your child's IEP is due in March, the goals are written for the whole fiscal year, the whole calendar year, whatever, till the next March. And so know that it's not written if it's in March, it's not written just till May. It's written for the whole year. So sometimes we forget, like, oh, wow, that's a lot to accomplish in a couple of months. Well, it's written for 12. Yeah. Just remember that it can always be changed. It also stands for informed, effective parents. I just feel like information is empowering, and sometimes we get burned out. I can speak to that firsthand, and need a little break from that, but information is empowering and can just really help us know how to advocate and help meet the needs of our students.